Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share a story that shows how our flaws can become our greatest strengths. This story is about a cracked pot, a perfect pot, and a farmer who taught them a powerful lesson. Let's start. Long ago, in a quiet African village surrounded by wide open land and golden fields, there lived a humble farmer named Mosi Adeyemi. Mosi was known among the villagers as a man of discipline, patience, and deep respect for life. He did not own much, but he never complained. His hut was small, his clothes were simple, and his meals were modest, yet his heart was rich with purpose. Every day, he rose before the sun painted the sky, before roosters crowed, and before the village stirred from sleep. Each morning, Mosi prepared himself for the long walk to the distant well that lay beyond the hills. Clean water was precious, and the journey was not easy. He carried a smooth wooden yoke across his shoulders, and from each end of it hung a clay pot. These pots had been with him for many years, and they were as much a part of his daily life as his footsteps on the dusty road. One of the pots was called Zuberi. Zuberi was strong, round, and flawless. Its surface was smooth, and it held water perfectly. Not even a single drop escaped it during the long walk back home. The other pot was named Quito. Quito had a small crack running along its side, almost invisible at first glance, but enough to let water leak slowly as the farmer walked. By the time Mosi reached home, Quito always carried only half of what it had been filled with. Zuberi took great pride in itself. Day after day, it admired how perfectly it did its job. It believed its value was greater than anything else on the yoke. Quito, on the other hand, lived quietly with its flaw. It felt the water slipping away from its body every morning, drop by drop, and with each drop, its heart felt heavier. As the farmer walked, the two pots would sway gently against the rhythm of his steps. One morning, as sunlight slowly spilled over the land, Zuberi finally spoke with a voice filled with pride and scorn. It mocked Quito, calling it useless and shameful, reminding it that half of its water was always lost before reaching home. Zuberi questioned why Farmer Mosi even bothered carrying such a broken pot at all. Quito did not reply. It remained silent, though the words pierced deeply. With every step on the long path, Quito felt smaller and more worthless. The farmer continued walking, unaware of the silent pain growing within the cracked pot. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The same journey, the same words, the same shame repeated again and again. Slowly, Quito began to believe the cruel judgments spoken against it. It began to feel that its existence was a mistake. One morning, under the warm African sun, Quito finally reached the edge of its strength. As water leaked from its crack, something else flowed as well: sorrow. In a trembling voice, filled with pain and regret, Quito spoke directly to Farmer Mosi for the first time, apologizing for being broken and for wasting his hard work. Mosi stopped walking. He listened. His eyes were calm, his face gentle, and his heart open. He asked Quito why it carried such sadness, and for the first time Quito poured out all its pain, its shame, its regret, and its belief that it was nothing but a burden. Farmer Mosi did not interrupt. He listened fully, with the patience of a man who understood more than he revealed. When Quito finished speaking, Mosi smiled softly and promised that soon Quito would understand its true worth. Quito did not know what the farmer meant, but something in his voice planted a seed of hope deep within its heart. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in soft, golden light. Farmer Mosi Adeyemi rose from his mat before the village stirred, just as he always did. He washed his face, tied his simple robe, and stepped outside his hut. The air was cool, carrying the distant sound of insects retreating and birds welcoming the day. As usual, he lifted the wooden yoke and carefully placed Zuberi and Quito at either end. Quito felt nervous. The farmer's promise from the previous day echoed inside its fragile body. "Tomorrow I will show you something," he had said. Quito did not know what to expect. It only knew that hope, long forgotten, had begun to stir inside it like a small flame refusing to die. Zuberi, however, walked with the same confidence as always. It believed nothing could change the truth it had accepted for so long, that perfection was the highest value and flaws were shameful. Yet deep within, a faint discomfort lingered. The farmer's calm response to Quito, yes sorrow, had unsettled Zuberi in a way it did not yet understand. The journey to the well was long. Dust rose beneath Mosey's feet, and the wooden yoke creaked gently with every step. Along the way, the path curved through open land where dry soil stretched endlessly, broken only by scattered stones and hardened grass. To Quito, the land felt lonely, as though it mirrored its own emptiness. At the well, Mosey filled both pots with clear, cool water. As always, Zuberi held every drop proudly, while Quito felt the familiar weight of water beginning to slip away almost immediately. The walk back began under a rising sun. As they moved forward, Mosey spoke softly, his voice steady and kind. He asked both pots to observe the path carefully. Quito obeyed, lowering its gaze for the first time not in shame but in curiosity. As it looked down, something unexpected caught its attention. Small green shoots lined the side of the road. Some had grown into delicate plants, their leaves wide and alive. Others were crowned with flowers, bright, colorful, and gently swaying in the breeze. Dew clung to their petals, making them sparkle like tiny jewels. Quito gasped silently. It had walked this path every day, yet it had never truly seen it before. Zuberi also looked down, but on its side of the path there was only dry soil, bare and untouched. For the first time, Zuberi felt something shift inside. The silence between the two parts felt heavier than words. When they reached home, Mosey carefully set them down. Quito noticed, as it always did, that much of its water was gone. The familiar shame returned, creeping back into its heart. Despite the beauty it had seen, doubt wrapped itself tightly around its thoughts. In a soft, trembling voice, Quito spoke again, saying that even after witnessing the flowers, it had still failed to carry water properly. It feared that beauty alone could not erase its flaw. Mosey knelt beside the pots, resting his hands gently on the cool clay. His smile was warm and patient, like someone who had waited a long time for this moment. He began to explain, slowly, thoughtfully, guiding Quito toward understanding rather than forcing it. He spoke of intention, awareness, and purpose. He reminded Quito that not all value could be measured in fullness or perfection. As Mosey spoke, something within both pots began to change. And far beyond them, the flowers along the path continued to grow, silently preparing to reveal the truth they had carried all along. As the sun climbed higher, Mosey stayed beside the two pots, his eyes warm with a kind of understanding that only time and patience could bring. He watched Quito carefully, as if he could see the pain hidden behind the pot's silence. Then he looked at Zuberi, whose pride had begun to feel heavy in its own way. The perfect pot was no longer mocking. It was listening, but the truth was slowly making it uneasy. Mosey spoke gently. "My dear friends, do you remember the path we walked this morning?" Zuberi nodded, though it did not understand why the farmer was asking. Quito remained quiet, waiting. Mosey continued. "Did you notice the flowers?" Quito's voice trembled as it answered. "Yes, master. They were beautiful. I saw them. I never knew this road could be so alive." Zuberi looked down at the ground, embarrassed for the first time. It had seen nothing but dry earth on its side. Mosey smiled. "Yes, they were beautiful. But do you know why they grew there?" Quito was silent. It had no answer. Zuberi also stayed quiet, but it felt a strange sense of unease. Mosey's voice became calm, almost like a gentle breeze. "I planted those seeds long ago." Quito's heart beat faster. Seeds. It was the first time Quito felt that its leak might not be a mistake, but part of a bigger story. Mosey continued. "I planted the seeds along the side of the road where your water falls. I knew about your crack from the beginning, and I understood your purpose before you did." Quito's clay body trembled with emotion. The farmer's words washed over it like cool water on a dry day. It felt something it had never felt before. Acceptance. Mosey looked at Quito and spoke softly. "Every day, as we walk back, your water drops fall on the soil. Without you, those seeds would never have grown. Without your crack, there would be no flowers." Quito's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different. These were not tears of shame, they were tears of relief, of understanding, of being seen. Zuberi watched silently, feeling its own pride begin to crumble. It had always believed that being perfect was the highest form of value. But now, it saw the truth in Quito's purpose. It saw how something imperfect could still create beauty. The farmer's voice continued, "Quito, your crack is not a mistake, it is a gift. You have been carrying beauty with you all this time without even knowing it." Quito's voice was barely a whisper. "But, master, I always thought I was a burden." Mosey shook his head, smiling. "No, my friend, you are not a burden, you are a blessing." Zuberi's heart felt heavy with regret. It realized that all this time it had been cruel. It had judged Quito without understanding. It had forgotten that value is not always visible at first glance. Mosey looked at Zuberi and said, "And you, Zuberi, you have your own purpose too. Your strength and your perfection bring clean water to my home. You help my family drink, cook, and live. You are needed." Zuberi lowered its head, feeling ashamed. I didn't understand," it whispered. "I thought I was better because I was perfect." Mosey placed a hand gently on Zuberi's smooth side. "No one is better. Everyone is needed. Each of you brings something different. And together, you make my life complete." Quito looked at Zuberi and felt something new. Forgiveness. It was not easy, but it was real. It realized that Zuberi's cruelty came from ignorance, not from evil. Zuberi's voice shook as it spoke. "Quito, I am sorry. I judged you without knowing your story. I treated you like you were worthless. Will you forgive me?" Quito's eyes glowed with compassion. "Of course, my friend, we all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn and grow." Mosey smiled. And for the first time in many months, the two pots felt a sense of unity. They were no longer enemies. They were friends, each with their own role, each with their own purpose. That day, the farmer did not carry them as he normally would. Instead, he placed them beside the path for a moment, allowing them to absorb the beauty they had helped create. The flowers swayed gently, as if they were thanking the cracked pot for giving them life. The sun continued to rise, and the village began to awaken. Children ran through the fields, laughing. Women gathered at the river to wash clothes, and Mosey, the humble farmer, stood quietly with his pots, knowing that his simple act of love had changed their lives forever. The following morning, the village woke to the same rhythm it always had. Roosters crowing, women calling out to each other, children running barefoot through the dirt roads, and the sound of drums echoing faintly from a distant celebration. But for Mosey Adeyemi, something inside had changed. He felt a quiet joy that was not from wealth or pride, but from a deeper understanding of life. The pots were no longer just objects to him. They were companions on his journey, each with its own story. As he stepped outside, he noticed how the flowers had begun to brighten the path even more. Their colors seemed to glow under the sun, and their scent filled the air with a sweet, calming fragrance. People who walked along the road started to pause, their faces lighting up as they admired the beauty. Some villagers asked Mosey about the flowers. Who planted them? They wondered. How did they grow so well in this dry soil? Mosey smiled quietly and simply replied, "It is a gift of the road." The villagers didn't understand. But they accepted his answer because Mosey was a man of respect and his words carried the weight of truth. They believed what he said because they trusted him. Inside the village, rumors began to spread. The flowers became a topic of conversation, and people started to walk along the path just to see them. Some even brought baskets and harvested the blooms to decorate their homes. Children began to play among them, and the path, once dusty and dry, became a place of joy. Quito watched all this from the side of the road. It felt the warmth of the sun on its cracked side and the soft touch of the wind. For the first time, it felt proud of its crack. It felt honored. It realized that its flaw had become a source of beauty that touched many lives. Zuberi also noticed the attention. It saw how people admired the flowers and how they spoke about the road with joy. But it still felt a strange emptiness inside. It had always believed that being perfect was the highest form of value. Now it saw that perfection alone did not bring joy or meaning. It began to wonder what else life could offer beyond being flawless. Then one day, a young girl named Asha walked along the road carrying a small clay bowl. She was known in the village for her curiosity and her kind heart. She approached Mosi and asked, "Sir, why are these flowers here? They are so beautiful, but they seem to grow only on one side." Mosi smiled at her. "You have noticed something important," he said. "These flowers grew because of something that is not perfect." Asha looked at the cracked pot and asked, "Is the pot broken?" Mosi nodded gently. "Yes, it has a crack, but that crack is not a weakness. It is a gift." Asha's eyes widened. She looked at Quito with new respect, and then at Zuberi, who had always been seen as the better pot. She suddenly understood that strength and beauty were not always found in perfection. Asha walked back to her home, her mind full of thoughts. She told her mother about the cracked pot, and her mother listened quietly. Later, she shared the story with her father, who nodded thoughtfully. As days passed, the story of the cracked pot spread beyond the village. Travelers passing through would stop and admire the flowers. Some would sit by the road and rest, their faces calm and peaceful. Even people from nearby villages began to come, drawn by the beauty that had grown along the path. The flowers became a symbol of hope. They reminded people that even broken things could create beauty. They reminded them that life was not about being perfect, but about finding purpose. Quito, once filled with shame, now felt valuable. It felt the love of the farmer and the admiration of the people. But it also felt something else, a sense of responsibility. It realized that its crack was not just a gift, it was a duty. It had to continue to water the flowers, to keep the beauty alive. Zuberi, too, began to change. It no longer mocked Quito. It began to see the world with new eyes. It saw that perfection without purpose was empty, and that flaws could carry meaning. And Mosi, the humble farmer, watched it all quietly. He had never intended to create a lesson for the village, but he had. He had never meant to teach his pots about life, but he did. And as he continued his daily walk to the well, he realized that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the smallest things. Weeks passed, and the village changed in small ways that were almost invisible, yet deeply significant. People began to speak differently, their conversations became softer, their hearts seemed more open. Even the children, who once laughed without thinking, now laughed with a gentler joy. The flowers had touched the village in a way that no one could explain, and the cracked pot had become a quiet symbol of transformation. Asha, the curious girl, visited the path daily. She would sit beside the flowers and watch the petals sway in the breeze. She would touch the cracked pot gently and whisper, "Thank you." It felt strange to thank a pot, but she did not know how else to express the feeling that had grown inside her. One evening, Asha returned to her home with a heavy heart. She had heard her neighbors arguing. Two women were fighting over a small piece of land, shouting at each other and refusing to listen. The argument had grown bitter, and their voices had disturbed the peace of the village. Asha's mother noticed her sadness and asked, "What troubles you, my child?" Asha replied, "The village is fighting. They are angry and bitter. They don't listen to each other. They are so focused on being right that they forget to be kind." Her mother sighed. People often forget that everyone has their own struggle. They forget that not everything is perfect. Asha thought of the cracked pot. She thought of how its flaw had become a blessing. She wondered if the villagers could learn the same lesson. The next day, Asha went to the path and asked Mosi for permission to speak to the villagers. She wanted to tell them the story of the cracked pot, to remind them that imperfections can create beauty. Mosi listened carefully and nodded. He agreed, and he asked her to speak with a calm heart and a wise mind. Asha stood near the flowers, and when the villagers gathered, she began to speak. She told them about Quito and Zuberi, about the cracked pot's shame and the farmer's kindness. She explained how the flowers grew because of the crack, and how the village had become more beautiful because of the broken pot. At first, some villagers laughed. They did not believe that a broken pot could bring such beauty. But as Asha continued, their faces softened. They remembered the flowers. They remembered how the path had changed. They remembered the peace that came with it. Slowly, the argument between the two women ended. They stood in silence, looking at the flowers, and for the first time, they realized how small their conflict was compared to the beauty around them. They hugged each other, tears in their eyes, and apologized. The villagers began to understand that the story was not only about a pot. It was about life. It was about how people often judge others based on their flaws. It was about how society sometimes values perfection more than purpose. And it was about how love and kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. From that day, the village changed. People began to help each other more. They began to speak with patience. They began to accept that everyone had their own cracks. They began to see beauty in imperfection. Mosey watched all this quietly. He had never expected his simple act to have such an effect. He was happy, not because his pots were praised, but because his village had learned to be kinder. Zuberi and Quito continued their journey every day. They no longer felt like rivals. They were companions, each with their own purpose. Zuberi carried water with humility, and Quito watered the flowers with joy. The path became a place of peace, and the village became a place of harmony. And all of this happened because a farmer had believed in a cracked pot. Several months passed, and the village continued to flourish. The flowers along the road had grown taller and more vibrant. Their colors spread like a ribbon of beauty across the land. Travelers still came to admire them, and the villagers felt proud of their path. The road had become a symbol of hope and peace, but life, as it always does, brought change. One dry season arrived with harsh heat. The sun burned brighter, and the land became dry and cracked. The river that once flowed nearby became thin, and the well began to struggle. Water became scarce, and the villagers felt fear. The once green fields turned brown. The crops began to wither. The animals grew weak. The village that had enjoyed peace and beauty now faced the harsh reality of survival. People began to worry. They spoke in hushed voices. Some even began to panic. They asked each other, "What will we do if the water runs out? How will we survive?" Mosey watched the villagers with a heavy heart. He knew the drought was serious. He knew the well was drying. He knew the villagers needed water more than ever. He stood beside the pots one morning, his face serious. Zuberi and Quito felt the tension in the air. They knew something was wrong. Mosey picked up the yoke and began walking toward the well. The road felt different now. It was dusty, dry, and the flowers had begun to wilt. Their colors faded, and their leaves hung lifelessly. Quito felt sadness as it watched the flowers suffer. It had never imagined that its purpose could be threatened. As Mosey walked, he spoke softly to the pots. "Today, we will need you both more than ever. We must carry water carefully, and we must use it wisely." Zuberi felt a sense of pride. This was its chance to prove its worth. It would carry every drop without wasting a single one. It would show that perfection was the best gift. Quito felt fear. It worried that its crack would make the drought worse. It worried that it would become a burden once again. But Mosey's calm voice reminded it of something it had forgotten. When they reached the well, the water was low. Mosey filled both pots, but the amount was less than usual. The weight felt lighter, but the importance felt heavier. As they walked back, the heat pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. Zuberi held every drop of water tightly, proud of its strength. Quito, however, leaked water slowly, drop by drop, just as it always had. But something unexpected happened. The water that leaked from Quito did not simply disappear. It fell onto the soil along the path, and despite the drought, small shoots began to appear. Not many, but enough to show that life could still grow. The villagers watched in amazement. They saw that the flowers were not completely dead. They were still alive, slowly recovering. Quito's leak had become a lifeline. Mosey realized that the crack was not a weakness. It was a source of survival. When they returned to the village, Mosey gathered the people and told them the truth. He explained that the cracked pot had been helping the path all along. He reminded them that the lesson of the pot was not only about beauty, but also about resilience. The villagers listened carefully. They began to understand that even in times of hardship, their strengths and weaknesses could help them survive. They started to conserve water. They used the water wisely. They protected the crops and the animals. They supported each other. They stopped judging those who struggled and began to help them instead. The drought did not end quickly. It took time, patience, and unity. But the village survived. They learned that even in the hardest times, their flaws could become strengths if they were used wisely. Zuberi and Quito continued their daily journey, but now their purpose was deeper. They were not only carrying water and watering flowers, they were carrying hope. They were carrying life. As the drought continued, the village's unity grew stronger. People began to understand that survival was not only about having water, but about working together and using every gift wisely. Even those who once felt proud or superior started to recognize the value of others. The story of the cracked pot became a symbol of hope and resilience. Children began to tell it to each other as they played. They would laugh and say, "Even a broken pot can bring life." The adults would smile, and sometimes they would quietly remember their own struggles and realize that their flaws had helped them survive. One day, a traveling storyteller named Baba Juma arrived in the village. He was known across many lands for his wisdom and his way of telling stories that touched the heart. People gathered around him, eager to hear his tales. Baba Juma looked at the path, lined with flowers, and noticed the cracked pot sitting quietly beside it. He listened to the villagers as they explained the story of Quito and Zuberi. Then he smiled and said, "This is a story of truth. It teaches us that what we see is not always the whole truth. It teaches us that flaws can become gifts. It teaches us that we must not judge others without understanding their purpose." The villagers were honored to hear such praise from the storyteller. But Baba Juma also had a warning. He said, "The world is full of people who will judge you for your flaws. They will call you useless. They will try to make you feel ashamed. But remember this: your weakness can be your strength if you choose to use it wisely." The villagers listened carefully. They began to realize that the lesson of the pots was not only for them, but for everyone who would ever hear the story. Baba Juma continued, "There will always be people who think they are perfect, but perfection does not mean value, and imperfection does not mean worthlessness. The true measure of a person is what they do with what they have." As he spoke, he looked at Zuberi and said, "You are strong and flawless, and that is a gift. But your strength is only valuable when you use it for others." Then he looked at Quito and said, "And you, cracked pot, your crack is a gift. But you must not hide from it, you must use it, you must embrace it." Quito felt tears in its eyes. It realized that its purpose was not just to water flowers, but to inspire hope. It realized that its crack was not something to hide, but something to celebrate. Zuberi felt humbled. It realized that being perfect was not enough. It needed to be kind, understanding, and supportive. From that day, the villagers began to apply the lesson of the pots in their lives. They stopped mocking others. They stopped judging. They began to help each other, even when they did not fully understand someone's struggles. The drought continued, but the village continued to survive. Their unity became their strength. Their compassion became their power. And as the days passed, the flowers along the road began to grow stronger. They became a symbol of hope, not only for the village, but for everyone who passed through. People came from far and wide to see the flowers and to hear the story. They left the village with a new understanding of life, and they carried the lesson with them wherever they went. The story of the cracked pot became a legend. Passed down from generation to generation, it was told around fires, in homes, and in schools. It was told to children who felt broken and to adults who felt lost. And through it all, Quito and Zuberi continued their journey every day, carrying water and beauty, living with purpose, and reminding the world that flaws can be gifts. As the seasons changed, the village became known far beyond its borders. People came not only to see the beautiful flowers, but to hear the story of the cracked pot. Travelers arrived with gifts, small pieces of cloth, grains, and sometimes even coins. They did not come to offer payment, but to show gratitude. They had been touched by the lesson and wanted to honor the village for sharing it with the world. Among those travelers was a young man named Kwame, who came from a distant town. He was different from the others. He didn't come with gifts or with a smile. Instead, he came with a heavy heart and a troubled mind. Kwame had heard about the story of the cracked pot, and he came to see it for himself. But he was not searching for beauty. He was searching for answers. He had grown up in a place where people valued only the perfect. He had been judged for his own weaknesses, and he had been rejected for not fitting into the standards of others. He had been called useless, and he had been made to feel ashamed of his own imperfections. When Kwame arrived in the village, he walked along the path slowly, staring at the flowers. He looked at Kito and Zuberi and felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, envy, sadness, and hope. He remembered his own life and how he had been treated. He wondered if this village truly understood what it meant to be broken. He approached Mosi and asked, "Is it true? Is the cracked pot really valuable?" Mosi looked at him kindly and said, "Yes, my son. It is true." Kwame's voice trembled. "But how can it be? How can something broken be important?" Mosi smiled gently. "Because value is not always found in perfection. Sometimes value is found in what you give, not what you hold." Kwame looked at the cracked pot again. He remembered the words of those who had rejected him. He remembered the way people had laughed at him. His heart felt heavy, but he also felt something else. Something he had not felt in a long time: hope. Mosi noticed the change in Kwame's expression and said, "Come, sit with me. Let me tell you something." They sat under the shade of a large baobab tree. The tree's roots spread deep into the ground, and its branches stretched wide, offering shelter to anyone who sought it. Mosi began to speak. "Kwame," he said, "the world will always judge you. People will always look at your flaws and call you worthless. But your value is not determined by them. Your value is determined by what you do with your life." Kwame listened carefully, his eyes fixed on the ground. Mosi continued, "You may be cracked, but you are not broken. You may be imperfect, but you are not useless. Every flaw can become a source of strength if you choose to use it." Kwame's eyes filled with tears. He had never heard such words before. He had always believed that he had to be perfect to be accepted. Mosi placed a hand on Kwame's shoulder and said, "Come with me tomorrow. I will show you something that will change your life." Kwame nodded slowly, unsure of what to expect, but willing to believe. The next morning, Kwame followed Mosi to the path. As they walked, Mosi spoke softly. "You see these flowers? They grew because of the cracked pot. The pot leaked water, and the water gave life to the seeds." Kwame looked at the flowers with new eyes. He began to understand the message. He began to feel the warmth of hope in his heart. Mosi turned to Kwame and said, "You are like Kito. You have a crack. But that crack can bring life. It can bring beauty. It can bring hope." Kwame's voice was soft. "But what if people still reject me?" Mosi smiled. "Then you must learn to accept yourself first. Your worth does not depend on others. It depends on you." Kwame nodded, feeling a sense of peace for the first time in years. He realized that his past did not define his future. He realized that he could choose to use his weaknesses to create something meaningful. As the days passed, Kwame stayed in the village. He helped Mosi in the fields, and he began to learn the value of hard work and patience. He also began to help the villagers in small ways, sharing his own skills and strengths. He realized that he was not useless. He had value, and he had a purpose. The story of the cracked pot had changed his life. And as Kwame's heart healed, the village continued to shine, its path of flowers growing stronger and more beautiful every day. Kwame stayed in the village for several weeks. Each day, he worked alongside Mosi, learning the rhythm of life in the fields. He carried water, planted seeds, and helped repair the huts. The villagers began to notice the change in him. They saw how he smiled more, how he walked with purpose, and how he spoke with a softer heart. But despite the transformation, a part of Kwame still carried the scars of his past. He had been judged for so long that he still feared being rejected. He still believed that he needed to prove himself to be worthy. And one day, a messenger arrived from Kwame's hometown. The messenger was carrying a letter and spoke with a serious tone. "Kwame," he said, "your family wants you to return. They are waiting for you." Kwame's heart sank. He had not expected this. He had hoped to leave the past behind, but it had come back to find him. He read the letter. It was filled with words that cut deep. His family had written about how they were ashamed of him. They wrote that he had brought dishonor because of his weakness. They asked him to return and change, or to leave forever. Kwame's hands shook as he read. He felt the familiar pain rising inside him. The old shame returned, and he felt like running away. He wanted to escape back into the safety of the village, where people accepted him. But he also knew that he could not run forever. He had to face his past. He had to choose what kind of life he wanted. Kwame went to Mosi and shared the letter. He spoke with a voice full of emotion. They want me to return. They want me to be perfect. They want me to be someone I am not. Mosi listened quietly. His face was calm, but his eyes showed understanding. He nodded slowly and said, "You must decide what you want, Kwame. Do you want to live for others, or do you want to live for yourself?" Kwame looked down. He felt the weight of the question. He had never asked himself that before. Mosi continued, "You are not broken. You are simply different. Your crack is not your shame, it is your strength, but you must choose to use it." Kwame took a deep breath. He looked at the cracked pot, Quito, and felt a connection. He realized that the pot had suffered for so long because it believed it was worthless. He realized that he had been doing the same. He looked at Zuberi and saw the perfect pot's humility. He realized that even the perfect can learn and change. That night, Kwame sat by the path and watched the flowers. He thought about his past, his family, and his future. He thought about the crack in Quito and how it had created beauty. He thought about how the village had accepted him, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. He realized that he had a choice. He could return to his hometown and continue to live in shame, or he could stay in the village and live with purpose. The next morning, Kwame gathered the villagers and spoke honestly. He told them about his past, his family, and the letter. He spoke of his fear and his pain. The villagers listened quietly, their faces full of compassion. When he finished, Mosi stood up and spoke to the villagers. "Kwame is like the cracked pot," he said. "He has a crack, but that crack is a gift. He has a past, but that past does not define him. He is not worthless, he is valuable." The villagers cheered softly. They stood with Kwame, showing him that he was not alone. Kwame felt tears in his eyes. He realized that he had found a new family. He realized that he had found a place where he could be himself. But he also knew that he could not hide forever. He had to face his family and his past. He had to choose courage over fear. So he decided to return to his hometown, not to seek approval, but to show them that his crack was not a curse. It was a gift. Before leaving, he hugged Mosi, Quito, and Zuberi. He whispered, "Thank you for showing me my worth." Mosi smiled and said, "Remember, Kwame, you are not defined by what others say. You are defined by what you do with your life." Kwame walked away from the village with a heavy heart, but a strong spirit. He carried the lesson of the cracked pot with him, ready to face whatever came next. Kwame walked away from the village with the lessons he had learned heavy in his heart. The path back to his hometown was long, and the sun beat down on him as if testing his resolve. He carried with him not only a small bag of belongings, but also a new understanding of himself, that his weakness could be his strength. When he arrived, he found the village unchanged. The same dusty roads, the same people, the same faces. But Kwame was different now. He stood taller, spoke more clearly, and looked at himself with a calm certainty he had never known before. He approached his family's hut, his heart pounding. His mother stood at the doorway, her face stern and tired. His father sat outside, watching him with a hard expression. His brothers and sisters were inside, whispering quietly. Kwame took a deep breath and spoke. "I have come back," he said, "not to ask for your approval, but to show you that I am not broken. I am not worthless, I have a purpose." His mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She looked away, as if ashamed of the way she had treated him. His father remained silent, but his eyes softened just a little. Kwame continued, "I have learned that imperfections are not weaknesses. They are gifts. I have learned that value is not measured by perfection, but by what you give to the world." His family looked at him with confusion. They did not understand his words, but they could feel the strength in his voice. Then Kwame did something unexpected. He shared the story of the cracked pot. He told them about Mosi, Kito, and Zuberi. He told them how the cracked pot had been mocked, but had become the source of beauty for an entire village. He told them how the perfect pot had learned humility and compassion. As he spoke, his family listened. Slowly, their expressions began to change. They began to understand that they had been wrong. His mother whispered, "We judged you without understanding. We were ashamed of your weakness. But we were wrong." His father nodded slowly, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "We wanted you to be perfect. But we forgot that perfection is not real. We forgot that love is more important than pride." Kwame felt tears in his eyes. He had come expecting rejection, but instead he found a chance for healing. His mother stepped forward and hugged him tightly. His father joined, and the family embraced him as if they were welcoming him back into their hearts. Kwame smiled through his tears. He realized that his journey had not only changed him, but had also changed his family. After that day, Kwame returned to the village of Mosi Adeyemi. He brought gifts and stories, and he helped the villagers in any way he could. He became a symbol of hope and proof that even broken things can become beautiful. The flowers along the path continued to grow. The drought eventually ended, and the village returned to its peaceful rhythm. The story of the cracked pot continued to be told, spreading to other villages and towns. People who felt broken or rejected came to see the flowers and hear the story. They left with hope, and they carried the lesson in their hearts. Kito continued to water the flowers every day, and it did so with joy. Zuberi carried water with humility and pride in its purpose, and Mosi, the humble farmer, continued his daily walk to the well, knowing that his simple act of kindness had changed lives forever. The village became known as the place where imperfections became strengths, where flaws became gifts, and where love and understanding overcame pride and judgment. And the lesson remained clear: no one is perfect, and that is perfectly fine. Your flaws do not define you. Your purpose does. Never judge someone for their weakness. Embrace your own imperfections because they make you unique. If you like this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you don't miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart in comment, like and subscribe my channel, and visit my channel for more interesting story videos.